Okay, so are we recording?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Welcome to Infosec Decoded. This is Kaitlyn Handelman with Sam Bowne, Irvin Lemus. Lemus? Do you want to pronounce your last name?
Lemus.
Lemus. And Alan Weinstein?
Wennersten.
Wennersten? Okay, thank you. Anyway, so today we're going to go over the news, tech news, environmental news, any kind of news, anything related to security in any way. We'll talk about it. And so it turns out that today we're going to be talking a little bit about Loom. Loom is a video sharing site where you can throw up screenshots and screen recordings of what you work. And a lot of people use it when they're teaching, because when you're trying to explain to students, click on this button and click on this one, it really helps to have that visual aid. But of course, when you're dealing with screenshots and screen sharing, sometimes you might accidentally have private information on your screen that you don't want sharing. So Loom provides this private feature where if you don't want to make a clip public, you can set it as private. The only problem is that all the videos on Loom, you can see the preview publicly. And this is apparently a feature, not an oversight. So if you want to take a look at people's private videos and see what they're not showing, you can actually do that on Loom. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, because they don't tell you, right? People don't understand.
Right. They don't understand. You can also apparently do, it doesn't look like, as long as you know like the ID of the video, you can sort of browse around and look for things about it. Yeah.
Right. So it's unsecured direct object access.
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't actually make you log in and only let you see the ones you're authorized to see. They just put them all publicly available and hope you won't find the link.
So actually, yes, I do believe that is the case. Wait, no, you do need to sign in. You do need to sign in, but anyone can, yeah.
I think Instagram or something was that way for at one time. This is one of the OAuth top 10 vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But apparently, like I said, this was done on purpose for whatever reason. I
think the same reason everybody. Yeah, it's easier to build the system that way as long as you don't think too much.
Yes.
Yeah. So Alan's got a real shocker about the ACLU.
Yes, it turns out you can't trust anybody, including the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU, of course, has made a reputation by advocating for stronger privacy laws and criticizing big tech for its often exploitive behavior in regards to privacy. But a fellow by the name of Ashkan Soltani, who was retained by the ACLU, has posted a Twitter thread, which was subsequently picked up by mainstream news outlets, in which he alleges that the ACLU has been really the consummate hypocrite, and that the ACLU has spent over $5 million in advertising on Facebook, using Facebook's rather invasive privacy invasion model, and then sharing that data with the data on their contributors and users back with Facebook. And it's not only Facebook, they've also spent over $500,000 with Google and done much the same there.
So is it the deal that you can't put an ad on Facebook without selling them your data, or does it get cheaper if you sell them your data or something?
Yeah, that part I don't know. I really don't know the first thing about Facebook's advertising platform. So I don't know if this is simply an inevitable byproduct of any kind of advertising on Facebook, or if they took the extra step of sharing and essentially selling this data to Facebook in order to generate more leads and to increase their return.
I think I understand it. They wanted to have targeted ads on Facebook. Therefore, they must tell you more about the person so that you can target the ad.
Yeah, but they don't necessarily have to share the information about the people that they are that are contributing to them. They can say, well, we want people who are interested in sports, or we want people who are located in such and such city.
Oh, sure, but that's not targeted. I mean, targeted ad is this person right here, show them about sports. Show them about pickup trucks because I know this person is interested in that. Then you're showing them individual information about that person.
Right, but the accusation here is that the ACLU is sharing personally identifiable information
Yeah,
about
yeah.
its targets with Facebook.
Yeah, which you must do because Facebook must identify that person and then send them that targeted ad. It makes sense.
Yeah. So at any rate, this is not a good look for the ACLU. And according to Soltani, this is not even the first time that Facebook's had an issue with this. Apparently, way back in 2004, disgraced New York Attorney General Elliot Spitzer opened an investigation into the ACLU's privacy practices. So this might be a very long-standing issue at the organization, and it's only now getting a little bit more attention than it should, or it's finally getting the attention it should, rather.
Yeah. So it does make them just look like a bunch of hypocrites that are just doing anything to get money.
Yeah, and in this Fortune article that I've linked here, a former attorney for the ACLU is blaming the marketing staff at the ACLU, not the staff attorneys, which I guess is an organizational distinction with some significance, because it sounds like the attorneys are the ones who are actually effectively advocating for privacy, whereas the marketing people are just trying to raise money by hook or by crook.
Well, that sounds reasonable. And I know another thing about any of these do-gooder organizations or nonprofits is they're always desperate for money, and there's always somebody trying to find some way to bring in more money.
Yeah, although they raised a lot of money after Trump got elected. I know they had a record-breaking year thanks to Trump. So
Yeah.
and I was thinking after reading this news, well, what are the still clean privacy advocacy organizations out there? And I could only think of one. That's the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation.
That's what I was thinking. The EFF really seems to be very good-hearted and pure.
Yeah.
Never heard any scandals like this with them. And they are at
No.
all the tech conferences and they have a lot of good tech people on the staff. So I think they are smart enough not to do this.
I should hope so. And it seems like they're the last banner carrier of good privacy advocates who are not hypocrites.
I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty hot. And I observed that the first article I got is very much the same. I was surprised to hear what Trump did. Trump, he changed his website around November so that if you try to donate, they send you all these scary emails saying you have to donate now to preserve democracy and save the world from those rotten liberals. And so if you donate to Trump, there's 2 check boxes on the page that are pre-checked. One says next week, double this donation, and then continue to drain this much every month forever from my account. And it does that without telling you. And it's like not terribly easy. In fact, they altered it so it's even harder to notice. And so a bunch of people that plan to donate $500 find that they're donating thousands of bucks they didn't intend to donate. So they have a much larger number of refunds that they've been giving for people that complain about this. But of course, a lot of people don't complain and they end up just getting more money. And they made a ton more money after doing this. And I was feeling all, self-righteous and stuff when they mentioned, Democrats don't do this because they did it last year. And after they got all the complaints, the Democrats knocked it off. So it's not like they're running pure. I think I remember this. I think I donated to the Democrats about a year ago, and I noticed this box saying, hey, keep doing this every month. And I said, hey, that box is pre-checked. This is pretty dirty, but I unchecked it. But anyway, this is apparently, it's coming out now, and that's pretty sleazy. And they show this amazing graph of how much extra money Trump made. As soon as they did that, of course, they made a ton more money.
What they should do is they should do exactly that. But instead of saying donate, $500, $100, say donate 1 cent, then every month afterwards, donate that double.
Yeah.
And just keep doing that and just automatically have that. And so, every month, then it's like 2 cents, then 4 cents, and so on and so forth. And then eventually they get mega rich.
Well, I think they might have attracted more pushback a little sooner that way. But anyway, this is apparently working really well. And the other thing I saw is that Trump is rebranding himself as President number 45 because the Trump brand is so poisonous that he can't use it to raise money anymore. So now it's President 45 is the brand. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. And this is called dark media elements on your website, things that trick people into doing things they don't mean. Anyway, and Irvin's got securing PostgreSQL.
So this isn't necessarily a news article, but more of one of those tools that our listeners can use if they're running a PostgreSQL database and how they can secure it. It has a nice walkthrough for different scenarios for our listeners to secure their SQL databases.
Now, what is the point of PostgreSQL? Why is it better than MySQL or something?
Why is Mongo better? Why is
Well, Mongo's better
Jason?
because it's not relational. But some people use PostgreSQL. I assume it's smaller and simpler. I see it in simpler cases. Like I know Metasploit uses PostgreSQL.
I mean, I know.
CPFD also uses it. Sorry.
I mean, I was going to say, I think Postgres is just a little bit more pure open source than MySQL.
Oh, I thought MySQL was open source.
I thought so too. I think, yeah. But as far as I know, it's sort of like Apache versus Nginx.
Okay. Anyway, that's cool. It certainly would be nice to secure them. They are famously frequently unsecured.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so Kaitlyn's got why you should care about privacy. That's a good thing to talk about.
It is a good thing to talk about, and I'll get into why this caught my attention in a little bit. But first, let's go over the article. Recode over on Vox has an article about why you should care about privacy, and instead of the normal things like people are going to use it to spy on you, they talk about the basic things that we kind of oftentimes think of as a plus when discussing data collection. So they, in particular, put forth this argument that one of the big problems that we're facing is this radicalization in the United States. And we've talked on this podcast before about how there are people provoking that on purpose.
Like the Russians.
Like the Russians, people use Cambridge Analytica to bolster their political campaigns, etc. However, there's also a much more mundane reason for our increased out there-ness, let's just say. And that is the algorithm, like the YouTube algorithm. So the YouTube algorithm pushes forth recommendations based on what they think you will like. And usually what you like is going to be very evocative. And what's evocative is going to be very not necessarily tied to reality, right? So if you are geared towards conspiracy theories already, YouTube is going to amplify that and push forward a lot of conspiracy nonsense. And their goal is to get you addicted to their platform. And by the way, guilty as charged. I'm totally addicted to their platform. And that's where a lot of this danger comes from. It's not from bad actors trying to do bad things, but it's their natural consequences to collecting data and putting forth data that put us in really terrible positions. And the reason why I got into this, why I was thinking about this so heavily is because I saw that South Park QAnon vaccination special. And if you haven't seen it, it is probably the weirdest hour of TV you will ever see.
Yes.
And mostly because I sort of felt like Trey Parker and Matt Stone were told to make a vaccination South Park episode, and they did their darndest. But at the same time, I felt that they were in a existential crisis doing this. So for people who aren't aware, Matt Stone and Trey Parker are very libertarian. I don't really agree with their political views. However, this whole vaccination thing has really thrown their viewpoint under the bus, right? Because the whole idea of you should be able to do whatever you want and you're the best decision maker in your life, does not jive with current events, right? You can't, your right not to wear a mask does not override someone else's right to, not die of COVID, right? But also the other thing too, of course, is this proliferation of bad information. People believe in conspiracy theories. People can't be trusted to make their own decisions when a large portion of the population is, believing things that just aren't true. And so normally during like South Park, there's these expository moral lessons of libertarian viewpoints and everything is just in the middle. And you just have people who believe one thing on one side and another thing on the other side. And, oh, the truth is always in the middle. And for the first time, I sort of got the feeling that the writers, like in particular, Matt Stone and Trey Parker are really questioning this idea of of where we're getting our information and whether or not we should be responsible for our beliefs. And whether or not the people responsible, like YouTube, should be responsible for pushing out conspiracy theories. And these are really tough questions, and really got me thinking. So anyway, that's where this article came from.
Well, that's good. Yeah. It's certainly a big issue of our age. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all right, Alan, you've got the digital health pass. Oh, yes. I've been hearing
Yes.
a lot about this.
Yes. Now, this article is about New York State and IBM. They have teamed up for a COVID-19 digital health pass
On blockchain.
on the blockchain. And so now we know that IBM truly is circling the drain.
Well, no, they've actually been pushing blockchain a lot. They have a blockchain platform.
Yeah, they would. But, you know, IBM has not innovated in quite some time. And it seems to me that any company that's hitching its wagon to blockchain and large government contracts at the same time is a company that has run out of ideas.
Well, I don't know.
What?
I actually always push the IBM blockchain in my crypto class as the most sensible blockchain, which I must admit is not saying much. But
Yes.
it is more sensible than the others. Anyway,
I would have expected reflexive criticism from you, Sam, about this.
it's not a public blockchain. It doesn't have a bunch of proof of work miners. It's inside a company. So it's really nothing more than a database with shadow copies.
Yeah. Okay, point taken. Point taken. Yeah, and to be fair, there are other companies, many other companies, according to the Washington Post, 18 other companies that are pursuing some kind of COVID vaccine passport technology.
Oh, yeah, in Singapore.
Yeah, well, yeah, around the world too.
Yeah.
So this is not a new idea exclusively to IBM. And they're probably not the worst at this either by any stretch. Nevertheless, it is an interesting application, shall we say, of blockchain and of sharing of health information.
Well, you know, New York City's got one already deployed, also based on blockchain, that totally does not work. But anyway.
Which is why they have to now farm it out to IBM. And,
well, yeah, they can have a different one.
Yeah, and this one in particular is being used for access to sporting events in New York City. I think New York Knicks and New York Rangers games. And users have some kind of QR code that can then be scanned, and that will demonstrate that they've taken the vaccine, but they still retain the right to share certain information, but not all information, and so on and so forth. Anyway, is it a terrible idea? I'm not sure I'm willing to go quite that far.
Well, I think I'm also. This is a terrible idea. Go ahead.
Well, but here's the interesting part. This is where things get more interesting for me, is that this program has been called the Excelsior Pass, which is a very highfalutin kind of name for.
Okay, got better. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, for basically a simple blockchain-based app that gets that shares health information. Yeah. It got me thinking about a movie called Code 46, which is not to be confused with the cybersecurity firm Code 42. Code 46 was released in 2003 and stars Samantha Morton and Tim Robbins, and it's a weird dystopian science fiction film that's pretty good, actually, but never got the attention or the respect it deserves, in my opinion. And it's about this future in which there's a lot of genetic engineering, and there are a lot of viruses circulating around the world, some of which are presumably zoonotic, and some of which are entirely engineered by humanity. And these viruses are so pervasive outside of certain cities that are like enclaves. And it's very stratified society around the world. So if somebody wants to get into a city, you need to have what's called a papel, or this passport, essentially. And Samantha Morton works for a company that makes these papels.
Yep.
Without getting into too much detail, what happens in this movie is that there's basically a forging ring for these papels. And this scenario here with IBM in New York really reminded me of that.
Oh
In
yeah,
that
there's
you
already
have-
forging. There's a lot of forging of those vaccine documents already.
Sure, yes, which is rather low tech.
Yeah.
But in this world, there's this elite that has access to these papels, and then you have everyone else who's essentially condemned to be beggars outside of these city gates.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps not entirely unlike what we will be seeing with the coronavirus vaccine.
It's not unlike what we already have, where the rich live in gated communities and the poor live in like desperate bad neighborhoods or other countries where they can't have much.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting how some people are saying, well, that's why we need the digital version, because that'll be foolproof and they'll be immediately able to check and see who has their vaccine and nobody will be able to tamper with it like those cards. What could go wrong?
I know, but see, I have a fundamental logical problem. If I want to go to a sports stadium with like 10,000 people, why do I care if the other people have chosen not to get vaccinated? If I've been vaccinated, I'm fine. Now, the fact is, no matter what you do, 10 or 20% of those people are not going to be vaccinated. So you don't accomplish anything with those thermometer guns or whatever. So there are definitely going to be some people there that have the disease. But why is that? Why do I care if I've been vaccinated? I don't understand why everyone's jumping over that, saying, of course, I wouldn't go in there unless everybody else has been vaccinated. Why? Why is that my problem? If they want to kill themselves, so what? It reminds me of the one that came by a year ago, where everybody was going to have an app on their phone that would tell you if you had been exposed. And that never worked at all. It might have made a little sense, but it didn't seem to make much sense.
Oh yeah, whatever happened to that?
Well, they tried it in a whole bunch of places in America and other countries. It never worked because they didn't make it mandatory. So it relied upon everybody putting it on voluntarily and then everybody taking a test and voluntarily uploading the fact that they're positive, and nobody ever did that. So it never worked. I mean, it would only work if like 90% of people were doing all of that. And you could never even get the tests in America if you wanted them. So it was just a total flop everywhere. And this is also going to be a total flop. Obviously, we have 20% of Americans or so that are going to refuse to take the vaccine. So that's it. There's no way you can possibly have a large gathering of people without a bunch of them not being vaccinated if it's that popular. This is just pointless. You cannot have a law that outlaws something that a large portion of your population will not do. I mean, they will just not comply and sneak in or forge the pass or something. So I think it's all a pig in a poke, all this vaccine passport stuff. That's why I kind of like Biden's attitude. He said the government is not going to make a vaccine passport. All we're going to do is have privacy recommendations that if you want to do it, please protect the PII. That seems to me to be the right move. Anyway, so now I got this one here with the anti-vax people, which I thought was very interesting from McGill, California. But these guys found that a dozen individual people spread the majority of all the anti-vax content on social media. And this is important, in my opinion, as showing you how to get rid of it. There was a similar thing that came out about 15 years ago where they found out that most of the email spam came from like 5 people. There's 5 criminals pumping out all this spam. If it's that way, then you could just have law enforcement hunt down these individual people and make them knock it off, and that would fix the problem, as opposed to having to have a giant AI filtering it off everywhere. So anyway, I think it's interesting that there aren't really that many anti-vaxxers pushing this data. It's all just being created by a small number of people. And it reminds me of the statement they said, I think something like 75% of all the political misinformation online ended when they banned Donald Trump. It really is not that there's a lot of people believing this stuff. It's a small number of powerful influencers. So anyway, I think that's useful in understanding how to combat it. It would be far better to just kick these 12 people off Facebook than to spend untold money putting in some kind of automated filtering system, I think. Anyway, and so Liz is here. So you got the tracking cars.
Yes, actually, and I can kind of combine my first two into one explanation here,
Okay.
since I'm getting here late, because they're both really related. Both of these stories relate to ways that big corporate data is helping out agencies like ICE and Homeland Security, which is and it's coming from some sort of unlikely vectors. So the first story is about the way that uh, Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and Homeland Security have been getting data from companies that track vehicle data. One of them is OnStar, which is a pretty widespread company. I think it's a GM General Motors subsidiary that tracks consumer vehicles. And if you get in an accident, then they'll call the 911 for you and send you help is how they sell it. And then other companies include ones that track commercial fleet vehicles. And it's very interesting because these companies provide a ton of data to ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, and Homeland Security, more than one might think. Not only to fight crime or quote unquote crime, but also for a variety of reasons. And one other thing that was interesting to me is that a service I use, Sirius XM, which is satellite radio. And this happened like 4 years ago. There was an investigation into Sirius where they had been asked to activate and monitor tracking devices. Activate and monitor their radios as tracking devices, which is pretty interesting because you could sure do a lot with that data. And it's sort of an unlikely vector that people wouldn't think of for being tracked. I certainly hadn't. But some of these uses are useful. They've used OnStar for like investigating maybe a carjacking in progress. Okay, that's good. Other times, not so much. And one of the standouts from this article to me was when a guy got arrested for hauling like 13,000 pounds of weed in his truck. And then after ICE got wind of this, they subpoenaed the company for 3 months of tracking data as to where this truck had been. And that's, I don't know that that's okay. And then the other story also has to do with a giant database that's hemorrhaging information to ICE and Homeland Security, I'm sure, and all of the other 3-letter agencies. But this one really surprised me. It's concerning LexisNexis, which is typically used in for legal purposes. I used it back when I worked in the legal industry for a few years, and it's real. Of course, they've added in a lot of new features since I worked in that industry years ago, and some of them are pretty eerie. I was pretty surprised. It's not just for looking up cases anymore. Of course, they have built a feature in that tracks and individuals, and also compiles data into into basically dossiers for law enforcement, and they have a formal, a huge formal bargaining agreement with ICE now, $16.8 million to sell information to them. And their pitch is that they will combine 10,000 different data points on hundreds of millions of people and companies. Or I'm sorry, on people, two companies who want to assess the risk of a person. So say, for example, if you're a bank and you want to hire a person, they'll be able to determine whether you've got a history of fraud or not.
Yep.
So
It seems to me like they could easily identify undocumented immigrants by their pattern of behavior.
Oh yeah, it also has a feature call it, or it's got an extra add-on called the license plate reader subscription. It's for sure going to be used for that, and also again in Homeland Security, and it was pretty disturbing.
Big Brother.
Especially considering, like in California, DMV sells our PII to whoever's buying. So I mean, there's nothing to stop companies, and companies like this are gonna buy it so that they can feed you into the Big Brother database.
Yeah.
And that's going to be yet another deterrent for people to get their driver's license, which is something that we should want regardless of immigration status.
Yep. So it seems like we really need privacy regulation.
Big time.
Yeah. All right. And Irvin's got a poisonous text file.
This was a fun read.
Mm-hmm.
The CVE is from 2019, but for those who are not aware that a text file can be malicious, well,
Which
here
is
you
pretty
go.
much everybody. I mean, I always thought text files were harmless.
But see, things like antiviruses and other stuff generally don't even read the text files. They'll just skip them right through.
Yeah.
They're text files. What do they have? And this blog post shows how, for example, with a Mac, you can embed HTML stuff within a text file and have it send stuff back very easily.
I thought he was quite clever because I noticed the same thing. If you open a text file on the Mac, it opens in this awful thing called text edit that saves it in some other format like doc or RTF or something. And so first thing I had to do was put on a real text editor that wouldn't do that. But of course, that means you can put other information in a text file because it opens in too smart of a reader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is how somebody could do this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, a convenience feature of the Mac, opening in some powerful thing. It's like everything you clicked open in Microsoft Word on Windows. That would be dangerous. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a fair cop.
Yes.
And then Kaitlyn's got solar panels for canals.
Actually, I have two articles. I'm actually going to start with the darker of the two articles, and that way we can end on a lighter note.
Okay.
So these two articles have to do with environmentalism. The first article comes from the San Francisco Bayview by Ashley Jovic. And essentially what she talks about is that she moved into an apartment in the Bay Area and she started to get really sick. Like she even wrote her will sick, like she was throwing up, she couldn't sleep, she was weak, she was having heart issues. She really thought she was going to die, and and the doctors were perplexed, like, what's going on with you? We can't figure it out. So she tried everything, and eventually she started looking at the environment that she was in. So she got some air quality monitors, and she found that her apartment had very high levels of something known as TVOX, or volatile or organic chemicals. And those are found in essentially dump sites, and those are essentially pollutants. And it turns out that the apartment was built on a you know, a site where people used to dump chemicals, and the Bay Area in particular is known for having a large portion of its land mass devoted to old dump sites for, you know, radioactive or toxic chemicals. And of course, with the housing crisis, people are just sort of looking the other way and building new buildings to make money and be landlords, right? And yeah, people are getting now very sick because of this. And so what's really frustrating is that she found out that her apartment was making her ill. So of course she goes to the landlord, and like the landlord just ignores her. And so she goes to the people who own the building, and the people who own the building just ignore her. And then finally she goes to a lawyer kind of helps, but like just everyone ignores her. And a lot of people think she's absolutely crazy because, of course, if you go up and say, I think my apartment's making me really sick, most people are going to kind of roll their eyes and say, are you sure about that? But no, in this case, she was absolutely right. And she had the data to prove it. But despite that, no one did anything. She eventually had to move out. And there's really no help. And as far as I know, that apartment that made her deathly ill is still on sale, and you can go rent it today.
You can't even like start a lawsuit or something. I mean, this can't be legal.
I mean, apparently they had the rights to build this building, right? It wasn't like they built it and like covered anything up. The pressure to build new buildings has steamrolled, a lot of protections and to keep buildings from going up. And of course, most of the people living in places where they're going to get sick from the toxic environment are going to be people who can't afford to live in nice, fancy, apartments someplace safe, right? So we're talking about lower income people, people in marginalized communities. Those are the people who are going to be most affected by this. So it's absolutely both an environmental issue, it's also a class issue, and it's also, a race and social justice issue. So,
boy,
yeah,
it's also a corruption issue because as I'm seeing right now in Richmond, people, these developers make backdoor deals with local politicians where they agree to either pay off the politicians personally, because we've seen evidence of that in the Bay Area, or they'll offer some carrot to the city, like we'll give your city $10 million for the schools or something, and that sounds great. And meanwhile, they're like going to build some horrific dangerous housing development on top of a toxic waste dump, and they get people, and I've seen this, I've seen it unfold. What the developer does is they get the local trade unions involved, and they get them to show up to the public meetings and say, we want this development because it'll bring jobs to our community. Of course, that never happens either, because they never use they never use union tradespeople because they cost more and because they'd have to pay prevailing wage. So that never happens. But they sell them a bill of goods that it will. And then they also get affordable housing people to turn up and say, oh, well, anyone who opposes this is just a NIMBYist. And, even the people who say we should still build affordable housing, but maybe not on a toxic waste dump, well, they're just saying that because they don't want any housing around, and they want to keep housing low, and they know it won't happen. And so all of this involves a significant degree of manipulation, money changing hands, and the sad thing is when it comes down to it, these end up being for the enrichment. These developments end up happening for the enrichment of property developers and politicians, and the people who lose are the people who end up living there, and really also the tradespeople that build it. I mean, one thing that has always boggled my mind is, if you are a tradesperson, why would you want to be excavating and working from what I've seen, many times without the proper PPE provided in a toxic waste dump when you're constructing these properties. But none of that matters when enough money is involved.
Well, that's pretty surprising.
Yeah, and on that note, and the reason why I wanted to do the next article last is, yeah, that does sound pretty dire. We're all living on toxic waste dumps, and we should all be monitoring our air now. However, there is some good news, or some good ideas, I should say, being thrown out. So water evaporation is something that engineers have to deal with. So if you're building a reservoir, you have to make sure that the water doesn't evaporate too much because you want to keep as much of that water available as possible. And the normal way that they do that is that they actually throw a bunch of balls onto the top of lakes and reservoirs. And the balls essentially just block the sun, so it's in permanent shade. Now there's a new idea being floated around, and I like this idea, of adding solar panels over canals. So the solar panels would not only block the sunlight hitting the water, keeping it from evaporating, but also generate green electricity.
Yeah,
I think that is a great idea. And I'm looking forward to seeing that being implemented in the near future.
yeah, it sounds like a good idea too.
Yep.
All right, and Alan's got these Wi-Fi object sensors.
A few months ago, I presented a story about Origin Wireless, which released a couple of products at CES that allows people to monitor their home and movement in their home based on simply Wi-Fi signals. And it turns out that that is actually going to be a new standard, courtesy of the IEEE, the 802.11bf standard. And so what has been a proprietary technology will instead be a perfectly open standard that's available to all manufacturers. And this should be formalized in another 2-3 years, depending on how long that process takes. But it's very straightforward. This 802.11bf technology allows for motion sensing and object sensing based on the reflections and refractions of Wi-Fi signals. And with enough sensors, you can then detect movement or detect objects, and you can map out a space very well.
Yeah.
Now, if it's just one small startup that's doing this, that's not really the huge security and privacy concern. But if it's an open standard from the IEEE, that means presumably every Wi-Fi manufacturing wireless access point manufacturer will have this available. And so it'll become a ubiquitous technology. And so that does raise some real privacy and security concerns, because this stuff, this technology apparently is capable of fairly high resolution. And so it'll be interesting to see if it's capable of, say, facial recognition just based on the Wi-Fi signal, which would be pretty much an end game for privacy in the public sphere. You can't even leave your house without being identified, potentially even if you're wearing a mask. So,
well, the thing about like 2.4 and 5 gigahertz is that everything is sort of semi-transparent to those frequencies. So, and they're also not that small, so they can't make very minute resolution detail. So it'd be kind of like, if they did use it for facial recognition, it would be kind of like trying to do facial recognition on like a glass sculpture of a face without any real detail on it. So, I mean, technically possible, but it'll be interesting to see if that happens.
But if you watch the way someone moves, you could probably have a pretty unique identifier.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's that. Yeah, well, we'll see what comes of that. And I guess, and then I thought this was amazing. I saw this Twitter thread, and then I went and looked and found the articles. There's this new variant in Brazil of the coronavirus that is extremely dangerous, and it's growing like crazy. And it just was in today's Washington Post. They're having the worst outbreak ever in Brazil, like twice as many deaths per week as they ever have had, even at the peak, because of this new variant. And it's affecting young people, like teenagers and people in their 20s predominantly. They're like 80% of the cases. And it's spread out of control through Brazil. It's now spreading through most of Central America, and it's now been detected in the United States, in many states. So I've heard the experts I've heard in news say that we really don't expect a fourth wave in America because so many people are getting vaccinated. They say more than 130 million people have been vaccinated, and 100 million people have already had it or something like that. So the case of the number of people that can really catch coronavirus is presumably starting to shrink pretty small in America. But we're going to see, apparently this is what everyone was afraid of, a much more deadly variant moving very fast. And the thing I've seen in America is even in here in San Francisco, they ended the restrictions, and every restaurant is full of young people who I'm sure aren't vaccinated, sitting around with no masks now. They've decided it's over and they're fine. And that might not be true. Those young people might be getting sick pretty soon. So it's a thing to watch. But apparently, I'm amazed that I didn't hear more about this. This one guy, Eric Feigl-Ding, is a doctor that's been trying to get people to pay attention for this for about 3 weeks and getting more and more strident about, guys, this is a big problem. And apparently it's just like the last day or two, the major media finally picked it up. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about that, I think. And Liz has got people that made backups.
Yes. So one thing that you need to think about as a company when you're making your disaster recovery plan is that if you do get ransomware and you haven't printed that disaster recovery plan out, there's a problem because you probably aren't going to be able to access it.
Yep.
And this seems like something basic, but it's a frequent problem because it's just one of those, it's that last little crucial step of logic that many folks just don't consider because they keep all their documents online. And, you know, the author cited one case where a company had been hit and didn't even know who to call because they couldn't even access any phone numbers. So they're just kind of sitting there wondering, like, what do we do now? Because we can't turn on our computers, we can't turn on our phones, we don't know what to do. And there have been other issues too, where companies were diligently making their backups, except those got hit too in the attack because they weren't sufficiently segmented away from the rest of the corporate resources. So these are just some aspects that you might want to think of when you're coming up with your disaster recovery plan.
Yep, it's a similar issue. I know there's a lot of people make backups, but the backups are still on the network, so they get ransomware too.
Exactly.
Yep. All right. And looks like the last one is this JA3 thing. We're getting funny noise. Anyway, this JA3 thing, I did not understand what this is. What's the deal, Irvin?
So this was out of this past weekend's research that I've been doing to improve my packet wall while distracting myself from work.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I found Brim as a tool that you can leverage Wireshark stuff with. A pretty fun tool that I've been playing with. But in that, I also found this research for JA3 or JA3, like they call it. Basically, you can take the fingerprints of kind of like you know how in user agent on a packet you have the fingerprint of the OS and the browser and that kind of stuff.
Well,
So
it's pretty generic though. It just says like what version of a browser you're using. It's not like individual or anything.
Right. So what they found is within the hello packets, the TLS and SSL packets, you know how you have a list of the cipher suites and the types of things that you can do with what it can use. So what they found, the researchers from Salesforce, that's where this comes from, found is if a certain malware who tries to communicate over things like HTTPS will use a certain set of ciphers, will use a certain set of characteristics in their hello packets, in their TLS hello packets. So what they've done is they fingerprinted those in MD5 and have this long list of various browsers with various ciphers to detect malicious activity that is trying to communicate over HTTPS. What I didn't realize is that this is already implemented in many tools. We just don't turn it on because we don't know what the heck it is.
Oh, well, that does sound pretty good. I mean, malware that's not a browser will use some unexpected user agent, and that's always been considered a indicator of compromise. This sounds like a way to sort of automate that.
Yes, yeah, this is a way to going further and looking at the packets, and again within the hello packets for HTTPS communication to see, is this a legitimate request from something like Google Chrome or Firefox, or is this malware?
So all you'd have to do is really upgrade your malware to correctly mimic something innocent like Chrome, and then you get away with it.
Right.
But that's true of almost all indicators of compromise. You could, in principle, update your stuff to stop leaving that mark there, but it's still useful.
Right. Right.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was an interesting find this weekend.
Yeah, yeah. Another little tidbit. All right, good. And I guess we'll be back on Friday.